Now, I want to tell you something that the movies have been getting completely wrong for a very long time, and it bothers me, because the truth is so much more interesting than the comfortable story they keep selling you. People watch these films, these beautiful, glossy productions where some rugged hero plants a flag on the red soil of Mars, has a little adventure, maybe fixes a water recycler or grows some potatoes, and then casually climbs back into a shiny metal capsule and flies home in time for dinner. And audiences nod along, because that is how road trips work. You drive somewhere, you turn around, you come back. Simple, clean, reversible. But that is not how the universe works. Not even a little bit. The universe does not care about your return ticket. It does not negotiate with your desire to see your family again. It has a set of rules, beautiful and merciless and ancient, written in the language of mass and energy and orbital mechanics, and those rules are telling you something very specific about Mars. They are telling you that getting there is hard, but getting back is something else entirely. Getting back is a problem of a completely different nature, and most people have absolutely no idea why. So let us talk about it honestly. Imagine a man. He is exhausted, completely spent, and he has fallen into the bottom of a concrete silo. This silo is enormous. The walls are perfectly smooth and vertical and coated in freezing ice, and it goes up and up and up into a gray sky far above him. He wants to get out. He wants to go home. He has that desire burning in his chest. Now, he cannot simply jump. The silo is too deep. He cannot climb the walls. They are too slick. The only way out is to build a ladder. But here is the problem that makes this silo an absolute prison rather than just a difficult engineering challenge. The only building material at the bottom of this silo is explosive mud. Volatile, unstable, freezing mud that can propel itself upward when ignited. To build a rung of the ladder, he has to use the mud. But every rung he adds to the ladder makes the whole structure heavier. And a heavier ladder requires more mud to lift it, and more mud makes it heavier still. And heavier still requires yet more mud. And round it goes, this exponential spiral of mass and fuel, until the sheer quantity of explosive mud required to lift him even a single meter becomes almost impossible to comprehend, let alone to gather and ignite safely in a freezing, airless pit. That silo is the gravity well of Mars, and the mud is rocket fuel. This is what physicists and engineers call the tyranny of the rocket equation, and it is one of the most humbling mathematical realities in all of physics. The equation itself is not complicated. It was worked out by a Russian schoolteacher named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky over 100 years ago, sitting in a small room, thinking carefully about how you move things through space. What his equation tells you is that the relationship between the mass of fuel you need and the velocity you want to achieve is not linear, it is exponential. It grows with a kind of ferocity that our intuitions are completely unprepared for. Here is the basic situation on Mars. Mars has a surface gravity that is about 38% of what you feel standing on Earth right now. It has almost no atmosphere to speak of, a thin wisp of mostly carbon dioxide at less than 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. To launch a spacecraft from the Martian surface and achieve the velocity needed to escape Mars entirely, you need to accelerate to something around 5 kilometers per second. That is 5,000 meters every single second. The capsule needs to reach that speed, and it needs to reach it by burning fuel. And that fuel has mass, and that mass has to be accelerated too, along with the capsule. So you need fuel to move the fuel. And the amount of fuel you need to launch a modest return vehicle from Mars, to lift perhaps 2 or 3 humans and their life support and their samples, is staggering. You are talking about many tons of propellant sitting on the surface of another planet, 55 million kilometers away at closest approach. Now here is where it becomes genuinely frightening. You cannot carry all of that fuel from Earth. The numbers simply do not permit it. If you try to carry enough return fuel from Earth to Mars, the mass of that fuel makes your initial spacecraft so heavy that the fuel required to launch it from Earth increases dramatically, which makes the whole system heavier still. You quickly arrive at a situation that is physically impractical, a rocket that would need to be the size of a skyscraper just to get a modest return fuel supply to Martian orbit. The only reasonable alternative is to make the fuel on Mars itself, from Martian resources. And this sounds clever. It sounds like exactly the kind of human ingenuity that makes great movies. But when you look at what it actually requires physically and thermodynamically, the difficulty does not decrease. It transforms into a different kind of terror entirely. The Martian surface has two things in relative abundance: carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and water ice buried in the soil and locked in the polar caps. A process called the Sabatier reaction, combined with electrolysis, can in principle take these raw materials and produce liquid methane and liquid oxygen, which are excellent rocket propellants. SpaceX has bet heavily on this chemistry for their Starship architecture, and the chemistry itself is sound. But here is what the movies never show you: the thermodynamic reality underneath that chemistry. Converting frozen water and thin carbon dioxide gas into cryogenic liquid rocket fuel requires enormous quantities of continuous electrical power. The Sabatier reaction produces heat, yes, but the overall process of gathering, purifying, compressing, reacting, and then liquefying and storing cryogenic propellants at temperatures below -160 degrees Celsius is a massive, sustained energy enterprise. You need power. On Mars, that means solar panels working at roughly half the efficiency they achieve near Earth, because Mars is further from the Sun. Or it means nuclear reactors, which are heavy and complex and carry their own engineering demands. And this power generation equipment has to function reliably, continuously, in an environment that is brutally cold, with dust storms that can blanket the entire planet for months, reducing sunlight to almost nothing. Now pay careful attention to this next part, because this is where the thermodynamics becomes a genuine existential wall. The propellant production timeline for a crewed Mars return mission is estimated at many months, perhaps over a year of continuous operation, just to fill the tanks of a return vehicle. During that entire time, every single component in the production chain, every compressor, every heat exchanger, every valve, every seal, every power cable, every sensor, every pump, has to function without a critical failure. On Earth, when a valve fails in a chemical plant, you send a repair crew. On Mars, you have the crew members who arrived, wearing suits that are themselves fragile technological achievements operating at the edge of their design limits. A single frozen valve in the propellant liquefaction system, a single cracked seal in the storage tank, a single sensor failure that goes undiagnosed until it is too late, and the propellant production stops. And if it stops at the wrong moment, if you miss the launch window, if the tanks are not full enough, the spacecraft does not leave. And if the spacecraft does not leave during the available window, the next one is more than 2 years away. Which brings us to the celestial mechanics of the situation. And this is where the universe demonstrates just how little it cares about human schedules and human emotions. Earth and Mars are both orbiting the Sun, but they orbit at different speeds and different distances. Earth is closer, orbiting faster. Mars is further out, orbiting more slowly. The geometry between the two planets is constantly changing, and the energy required to travel between them depends critically on their relative positions. The most efficient transfer route between Earth and Mars is called a Hohmann transfer orbit, a long elliptical arc that takes roughly 7 to 9 months and is only available when the planets are aligned in a specific way. This alignment, called a launch window, occurs approximately every 26 months. If you miss it, you do not wait a few weeks. You wait over 2 years for the planets to come back into a configuration that permits an efficient transfer. This is not an engineering limitation that future cleverness will dissolve. It is an orbital mechanics reality grounded in the gravitational geometry of the solar system. You can use more fuel to force a faster trajectory, but the energy penalty is enormous, and you remember what happens every time you add more fuel. The mass goes up, the rocket equation bites harder, the silo walls get steeper. Now hold this orbital reality in your mind, alongside the biology, because the combination is where things become genuinely grim. A human being who has spent 6 to 9 months traveling to Mars, followed by perhaps 18 months living on the Martian surface at 38% gravity, followed by another 6 to 9 months traveling home, is not the same physical organism that left Earth. Bone density decreases in low gravity. Muscle mass atrophies. The cardiovascular system, which evolved to pump blood in a one-gravity environment, grows less efficient. The fluid distribution in the body shifts. Vision can be affected by increased intracranial pressure from fluid redistribution in microgravity. Radiation exposure during the transit phases, without the protection of Earth's magnetic field and thick atmosphere, accumulates and causes cellular damage. And what awaits this biologically compromised person at the end of the return journey is re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. This is not a gentle experience. Atmospheric re-entry at interplanetary return velocities involves deceleration forces of several times the force of gravity, compressing the body with tremendous sustained force. A healthy, well-conditioned person who has spent the preceding months in a high-gravity environment can tolerate this. A person who has spent nearly 3 years in low and zero gravity, whose muscles have wasted and whose cardiovascular system has reorganized itself, is facing those same forces with a significantly degraded biological machine. The engineering of the re-entry capsule can be optimized, but it cannot change the fundamental physics of deceleration or the fundamental biology of what prolonged low gravity does to the human body. The universe has built a sequence of compounding barriers here that is almost elegant in its ruthlessness. You need fuel you cannot bring from Earth, so you must make it on Mars, but making it requires sustained, flawless operation of complex machinery in a hostile environment over more than a year, and the window to actually use that fuel only opens once every 26 months, and the body that must survive the return journey has been progressively degraded by the very conditions of the mission itself. Each barrier makes the next one harder. Each solution to one problem reveals the full weight of the next. And I want to be clear about something. None of this means human beings will never go to Mars. It does not mean we should stop dreaming about it or working toward it. I am not saying stop. I am saying something more precise, which is that the scale of what the universe is actually demanding of us is orders of magnitude beyond what the cheerful movies suggest, and pretending otherwise is a disservice to the magnificent difficulty of the real problem. Here is what I find genuinely wonderful about all of this. The same physics that makes Mars so brutally hard to leave, the same orbital geometry, the same thermodynamics, the same gravitational mathematics, is the physics that gave us Earth. This planet sits in a position around a stable star where liquid water can exist on the surface. It has a magnetic field that deflects the worst of the solar wind and cosmic radiation. It has an atmosphere thick enough to incinerate incoming debris and regulate temperature. It has a moon large enough to stabilize its axial tilt and moderate its climate over geological time. The precise values of all these parameters, the orbital distance, the atmospheric composition, the magnetic field strength, the planetary mass, conspire to make the surface of Earth a place where the thermodynamic cost of living is actually manageable for biology. Mars does not offer you those numbers. Mars lost its magnetic field billions of years ago, and without it, the solar wind stripped away the thick atmosphere that once might have made it hospitable. What remains is a frozen, irradiated desert where the thermodynamic cost of everything from breathing to making rocket fuel is extraordinarily high. The honest intellectual pleasure in understanding all of this, the rocket equation, the orbital windows, the entropy of propellant production, the biology of re-entry, is not a smaller pleasure than the pleasure of watching a hero fly home in a movie. It is a much larger one, because you are not looking at a story someone made up to entertain you. You are looking at the actual shape of the universe, the real architecture of space and energy and matter that has been here since long before us and will be here long after. The laws of thermodynamics do not bend for narrative convenience. The rocket equation does not make exceptions for courage. The planets move on their own schedule according to forces that are billions of years old. That is not a depressing fact. That is a breathtaking one. And understanding it, truly understanding it, changes how you see the small blue planet you are standing on right now, and how rare and astonishing it is that the physics here works out in our favor.